Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel. Well, on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and tonight I got a good one for you. And I'm going to talk about working as an engineer. And it's very important because you can sum everything up with calculations, you can utilize plans, you can design, you could work out in the field, you can create your own plans and specifications, codes, everything that goes along with engineering. But one thing that you have to look at is work environment. And I can tell you myself, working as an inspector, I've worked in the public sector and I've worked in the private sector. Now, I'm going to include inspecting with this video. Now, this is my opinion about inspections. If you're going to do any type of inspection, it includes testing, construction inspection, you have to look at what your real desire is, what your real passion is. And I started off doing materials testing. I started doing laboratory testing. I worked at numerous testing firms, and I also worked in the public. Now, what you have to consider when it comes to work environment is where do you believe the best stability is? And tonight, that's what I want to share with you. I'm going to give you a comparison of working as an engineer between the private sector and the public sector. And believe it, if you're looking to become an engineer, this video might help you. Let me share my screen and let's get to it. Just bear with me here. All right. All right. This is from my LinkedIn page. Caught it? It's how you compare facility engineering in the private and public sectors. It says facility engineering, but in my humble opinion, engineering is engineering because you all take the same math and science in the first 2 years, and then you go off to your different courses in your last 2 years. But in order to get a PE, every engineer has to take the FE, their time in work, everything. So, outline. The outline deal with the scope of work, standards and regulations, budget and resources, innovation and improvement, career development and progression, and you have other things to consider. Now, when we deal with scope of work, one of the main differences between facility engineering in public and private sectors is the scope of work. You see, in the public sector, facilities engineers or civil engineers, they typically work on large scale, complex, and long term projects that basically serve the interest of the public. And they also benefit the society as a whole. Now, these projects may involve multiple stakeholders, regulations, and constraints, and require coordination and collaboration across different agencies and levels of government. See, when it comes to private sector engineers, on the other hand, usually they work on smaller, more specific and shorter term projects that aim to meet the needs and expectations of a particular client or market. These projects may involve more flexibility, customization, creativity, and require responsiveness and adaptability to changing demands and conditions. Now, when you deal with private sector, if you're going to do work for private sector clients, it's going to be less regulations involved, less paperwork involved. Whereas if you're in the public sector, it's more regulations, more paperwork. Now, if you are on the inspection side, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you work in the public sector as a construction inspector, like basically for a DOT, I suggest you go there because you're going to have more stability, particularly on the slow months, like December, January, and February, when there's no construction going on. Whereas if you're on a contract as a construction inspector, or if you're not on a contract, you're going to sit in the office, they're going to give you some training, they're going to give you some busy work. So it's not as stable. And you could also be laid off at the end of the project. So I would say this, if you're going to go in an inspection, because that's a good way to start out if you are looking for a career in any branch of engineering. You need to know how to test. You need to know how to inspect. You need to know how to document all your work. I would suggest that if you're going to work for a private sector firm, do it as an intern. You'll be better off, in my humble opinion. And then you can make your mind up whether you want to go to a public sector agency, because basically, when it comes to the private sector, you do a little bit more design. You get paid a little bit more. So you have more of a chance to be innovative, where most of your public sector structures, they're all standard. Let's get to point number 2, standards and regulations. Another difference between engineering in the public and private sectors is the level and type of standards and regulations that apply to the projects. You see, public sector engineers have to comply with strict and often rigid standards and regulations that ensure the safety, quality, accessibility, sustainability, and resilience of the public facilities and infrastructure. These standards and regulations, they depend on the jurisdiction sector and the function of the project and may impose limitations and challenges on the design and execution of the project. When it comes to the private sector, engineers will still, they're going to be subjected to some standards and regulations, but they're going to have a little bit more leeway and discretion in choosing the best practices and solutions for their projects. They may also have more opportunities to explore new technologies, methods, materials that enhance performance, efficiency, and aesthetics of the facilities. Now, what that is saying is, if you're going to be a consultant, I'm going to take the inspection out of it. You're going to be much better off as an engineer because you're going to be a lot better. You're going to have more resources. You get a chance to actually explore different projects. Where in the private sector, again, everything is standard, it's rigid. In fact, a lot of your public sector agencies are farming their work out to consultants. But the problem with that is the public sector believes that they're saving more money because they don't have to hire people. That's not true, because now you're going to have to pay somebody to do the work for you. Therefore, that work is going to come to the public sector. The public sector is going to increase their profit. But here's the thing about that. The public sector is going to have access to all of your standards and specifications as well, because they have to design everything to your standards and specifications while making a profit. And when it comes to private and public sectors, if you're a design engineer, in every aspect, you're going to have the stability, but you're not going to be as good as an engineer. You're not going to be a good engineer, in my humble opinion, in the public sector, because most of the work is paperwork. Yes, they have some CAD, but most of it is paperwork. got to get it approved by this person, this person. There's a lot more levels that you have to go through. Whereas when you're in the private sector and you're an engineer, you have greater flexibility. You have a chance at more projects because not only are you dealing with projects that serve the public when you get them from the public agencies, but you also have to serve the public with private sector jobs as well. But again, in my humble opinion, the win is going to go to the private sector because the private sector turns out better engineers because they're doing engineering and they're doing design all the time. You have more of a chance to become a project manager, and you have to watch your budget in the private sector. Now, in the public sector, you have to watch your budget as well, but it comes this way. You have to go through your legislators or some state government politician every fiscal year to give you monies for projects. Some projects may go, some projects won't. And those projects are generally road projects. They take a long time when they go through the environmental and the design phase. You got to go through the constructability phase to actually become a road. Budget and resources. Now, a third difference between engineering. Now, the article says facility engineering. I'm just going to call it engineering because engineering is engineering. This is a comparison between engineering in the private and public sector. Now, the difference between engineers in the public and private sector is the ability of allocation of budget and resources for the projects. See, in the public sector, engineers often have to work with limited and fixed budgets that are determined by government policies, priorities, and fiscal conditions. I just mentioned that. They may also face delays, uncertainties, and changes in the funding and approval process that affect the planning and delivery of projects. However, private sector engineers, conversely, may have access to more and varied sources of funding and resources that are driven by the market forces, customer demands, and competitive advantages. They may also have more control and flexibility over the budget and resource management and optimization for their products and projects. See, again, the public sector is driven by uncertainties. You have changes, the approval processes, funding, could be lack of funding, and you have fiscal conditions, governmental policies. So they're not really driven by the market. See, in the government, the government is not in service to make money. They're in service to provide a service. Where when it comes to the private sector, again, they deal with the market, customer demands, your competitive advantages. And this is why they have more control and flexibility over their budget and resource management and optimization of their projects. So in this column, I'm going to say it's a win for the private sector. Now, the first one, when it comes to stability in your construction inspector, I'm going to always say the public sector is going to win unless you work for a testing company and that testing company gets work from public and private developments and agencies. Remember, when it comes to engineering, particularly on the private sector, and this is where the public sector wins, in order for the private sector to actually make money, it does depend on the market. But you have to bill out work. In other words, individuals have to pay fees. Not only do you have to bill out work, you have to bid out work, meaning that you're going to bid for work, but you have competitors that are in the same industry. Like, I'll give you an example. If you have HNTV or HWC or Burgess and Nyepel, they're all going to be bidding for the same work, just like contractors. It is a competitive process. Now, I will say this, if you are going into business as your own consulting firm, start off with smaller jobs. Get your foot out there. You have to do a lot of networking, particularly if you're in your civil engineering fields, and you have to be licensed as well, especially if you're going to work in architecture, civil engineering, landscape architecture, mechanical engineering. Be licensed, because you're licensed, you're also dealing with the public more so than, let's say, uh, an industrial engineer or an electrical engineer, manufacturing engineer. But I always urge you have to see what your goals are. Do you want to work in a public sector, or do you want to work in a private sector? Moving on, innovation and improvement. A fourth difference between engineering in the public and private sectors is the degree and direction of innovation and improvement that occurs in projects, the type of projects. Now, the public sector engineers tend to focus on innovation and improvement that enhance the functionability, reliability, and durability of the public facilities and infrastructure. They may seek to incorporate social, environmental, and economic benefits and values into their projects. Whereas when we deal with the public sector side of engineering, in contrast, they tend to focus on innovation and improvement that increase the profitability, productivity, and the attractiveness of the facilities. They may seek to differentiate themselves from their competitors and satisfy their customers with their projects. Again, when you deal with the private sector, it's all about the demands of the customer. When you deal with the public sector, well, it could also have some demands from the public, because how do you believe me, I'm just going to say this. All of your public infrastructure, your facilities, financed by people who work in the private sector. And they're even financed by some of your workers. And who are they? They're the taxpayers. So this is why there are a lot more regulations when it comes to government, because the taxpayers are funding the government and also funding the people who are working in the government, like employees as well. So they have to be a little tighter with their budget, because I tell you this, there's a lot of waste in government. It may not be in the infrastructure area, but there is a lot of waste. So when it comes to innovation, the government or the private sector has to have the funds for innovation and their improvement as they try to find more efficient ways to deliver projects. Whereas in a public sector, a private sector, they can have all types of donors, or they can have developers, they can even have the other private sector industries like industrial, let's say education, which education is more on a public level as well, unless you deal with private universities. You can also deal with medical. With the private sector, again, it's driven by the market. The market is slow, not going to be much building going on. In fact, it's going to be a lot of remodeling jobs going on. If you're driving in the city, you see a lot of cranes. You know that's good for the construction industry. The cranes are going to be tower cranes. You don't see a lot of tower cranes. And you see a lot more people applying for inspecting jobs to go work for the DOT. See, this is where the private sector does win. When the economy goes bad, the private sector, they still employ people, they still have money. So, yes, the private sector, they have to cut back a little more when the economy goes bad. The public sector, it may cut back a little. However, if you're working in the public sector when the economy is down, you as an employee, you will have more stability. Number five, this is one important aspect of becoming an engineer, because you have to ask yourself, you want to do technician functions for your whole career? You want to get into management? Well, the fifth difference between engineering and the public and private sectors is the nature and path of career development and progression for engineers. See, public sector engineers generally have more stable, secure, and predictable career paths that are based on seniority, qualifications, and performance. They may also have more access to training, mentoring, and networking opportunities within the public sector, which is true. I can tell you, being in the military, when I was a Seavey, let's go with my rate EA. Come in, you start off as a construction man, then you move to a third class petty officer. Now I'm going in the enlisted ranks now. Second class petty officer, first class petty officer, chief, senior chief, and master chief. It's all laid out. They give you the training, tell you what you have to do as far as your evals. They give you performance advancement requirements that have to be signed off so you can move to the progression of the next rank. Now, when it comes to the private sector, engineers alternatively generally have more dynamic, diverse, and flexible career paths that are based on skills, achievements, and opportunities. They also have more exposure to different industries, sectors, and markets within the private sector. Now, let me stop you right there. Within the private sector, I know from working in it, I didn't have much career progression. They tell you everything is flexible, but remember something. When you're in a private sector, they have to have the money, and they have to have, not that the public sector doesn't have a need for more managers, but in order to put somebody in a management spot in a private sector, there has to be not just an opening, there has to be the need, there has to be money. Now, when they say flexible, you have to look at the department, you have to look at the head count, you have to look at your organizational chart. And you have to ask yourself, because see, when you're in the private sector, you're actually running a business. You need to generate a profit. So your career progressions might take a little longer in the public sector, where in the private sector, they may not. Because see, in the private sector, in the public sector rather, they actually have better training plans. I mean, even during the downtime, I know when I worked for NDOT, we had lots of downtime, but we had time to train, we had time to go to school, we had time to read up on the new specifications, because it wasn't all about making profit. We knew that we had a secure job. Where in the private sector, they're driven by a lot of deadlines. They have to get projects out really quickly. Now, are there people that get advanced? Yes, they are. But I found it from my own experience. This is anecdotal now. It's a lot more difficult for promotions to come away in the private sector. Now, what you can do is you can move from one company to another, but you still have to qualify. And then you have to look at who's in these positions. And I'm not saying that in either sector, nobody is picky, because you want the best person for the job. But I believe that if you want more of the promotions, go to the public sector. Now, there is politics in the public sector as well. That can also derail you. Do you have a lot of clicks? See, this is what you have to understand. There are a lot of clicks in the workplace. So you may be one that knows how to do your job, but if you don't interact with the clicks in either sector, where you're basically showing your face, they might not think that you care. But on the other hand, they could be selfish because really it's all about what you get on your valuations. It's all about, it's really how you perform. So basically, as a person going in engineering, you have to make the choice. You want to go in the public sector or the private sector. You can work both. And then if you work both, you can be able to make comparisons like I am. Let's go to number 6. Well, this is where I can add my own feedback. So we did a comparison where engineers go, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you from my own experience. When you are going to school, want to be an engineer, first thing you should look at to build your resume are internships. Now, you can take an internship to work in the public sector or in the private sector. That's documented work experience. What you have to understand about both sectors is the culture, the systems. Now, I will say this, because the private sector is not driven on profit, you're going to have a little bit more stability. This is why a number of individuals will go with the government and they'll stay for 30 years. They generally have better retirement plans, better retention, but sometimes the work can be a little slow because of the regulations and policies. Whereas over here in the private sector, you have more areas to go. Now, let me tell you this, particularly from a civil engineering standpoint, I would say go to a medium size or even a small firm if you're going to go into the public sector or private sector. Why do I say that? Very easy. You see, I've worked for big firms like AECOM, Dewberry and Davis. I work for Hanson now. I work for Hillis Carnes. The problem is when you work for those bigger companies, you get pigeonholed. And this is why promotions are very difficult in the private sector. Now, in the public sector, they can be difficult as well, depending on how large your department is, or how small your department is, because the smaller your department, the less of a need. So that means you may be pigeonholed. But with both sectors, you can always go somewhere else. Now, the money is generally better in the private sector, but the stability is much better in the public sector. And also in the public sector, somewhere you can find unions. I know AFSCME is a big union. I was a member of AFSCME when I worked for PennDOT. But overall, you have to look at the type of work. Now, I would say this. If you really want to be a good engineer, I'd actually work in both. Here's why. If you work in both and you get your license, you can become an entrepreneur. That means you can go and bid jobs from both the private and the public sector. And it's very beneficial because if you are more focused on private jobs, when that economy starts to slow down, you can go get those public jobs. But again, you have to be one who knows how to network. So that means you might have to do lunch, cater. You have to get your name out there. Bottom line, in all types of engineering, you have to bid for the work. So that means you have to have a pretty good RFQ. Now, what do I mean by an RFQ? RFQ stands for request for qualifications, because even though I might be a civil engineer firm, the next person might be a civil engineer firm, we might do two different types of work. This person may do geotechnical work. I may do environmental work. So I'm not going to go ahead and bid geotechnical work when I do environmental work. That doesn't make any sense. I don't qualify. That's not my background. And you might have to send out RFIs or proposal. Now, what is an RFI? A request for information. You have to know where you want to go as an engineer. This is why during your first 4 years, when you go get any type of engineering degree, they're going to be like, I'll give you civil engineering. Most of your civil engineering degrees are all general civil engineering degrees. And what do I mean by a general civil engineering degree? Well, civil engineering is divided up into subfields like transportation engineering, structural engineering, construction management, water resources, environmental. So you're going to take classes, not many, maybe 2 classes in your senior year, which are 400 level classes in a specification. Now, if you really want to go further into a specification, you go and get a master's degree. Because that master's degree is going to be focused more on your specification or specialization, because you have work experience or your interest, and there are more courses. Again, you have 30 credited hours. And then if you want to go for even a higher, or we call it a terminal degree, go for a doctorate degree. Now, me, if I went for a doctorate degree, I would go for more applied doctorate degree, not a PhD, because a PhD to me is engulfed in theory. Now, if you want to be a professor on the academic side, which is also on the public sector, that's fine. You with a professional doctorate, like a doctor of engineering, can also be a professor. You can also work on the private side as well. You can work on the private side as a PhD, but I just believe, in my humble opinion, you're dealing more on the theory. But overall, what I brought to you all in this video is, where do you want to go as an engineer? Do you want to work private sector or the public sector? The choice is yours. I would say give them both a try, because either way, want to be an engineer, there's plenty of work for you. Just have to go and find it. And that concludes this topic, comparison of engineering in the public and private sectors. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some political and some social content, you can check out my main channel, the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show on YouTube. Now, after I record videos from both channels, the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show and the 411 and the QCIS channel. Again, that's the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show, my main channel, and the QCIS channel, which is this channel. All the videos are pre-recorded, and then I post the videos up to my Twitter page. Now, for the QCIS channel, since it's more of an educational channel, it's a good place to show people who you are, what you're doing, It's educational because, again, it's more educational. I post the education information from this channel on my LinkedIn page. And in the end, the choice is yours. That's how it works right here with my channels. Again, here on the QCIS channel, what do? Give you a daily dose, science, technology, engineering, and math. And that concludes this topic on the comparison engineering. Where do you want to work? In the public or private sector? Once again, thank you for viewing this content here on this channel, the QCIS channel. Until next time, my name is Leon Jones. You all have a wonderful, gracious evening.